Okay, we're going to be doing Parshat Vayechi, which you can find on page 268. I'm going to probably end a few minutes before noon, because I'm going up to the Beis Olam. My brothers are picking me up, so I have to be there. I don't want to mess with them. And I have to be ready outside at noon.
Rabbi, how many years is it?
21 years. Ticket, working ticket. Oh, where? On that seat?
Yeah.
What is it? You know this
Oh,
story?
yours.
You can, if you want it.
No, I'm not taking it. It's not mine. You saw that yellow thing?
Yeah, I saw it too. It looks like someone dropped it, or someone refused to pay it.
I'm not taking it.
Right.
Yeah, George.
The story in Parshat Vayechi is the story of Yaakov spending his last 17 years in Egypt, addressing his children, giving them quote-unquote blessings. There's a level of prophecy. There is a level of revelations that relate to the destiny of the people of Israel based on specific personalities and traits of the tribes. He passes away. They bring him, they have a mass funeral. I don't know if it's greater than Mandela's or not as great as Mandela's. You would have to assess it. But there's a large levayat towards the land of Israel, which is described in detail, which we're going to have to analyze, and it's going to be the main focus of our discussion, the procession from Egypt to the land of Israel, the burial in Hebron. And then the fact that the book ends with the Jews in Egypt, Yosef dying in Egypt. And what's interesting is that this is a book that is supposed to represent the future, the history, as the Ramban teaches, Ma'aseh Avot, Siman Lebanim, that which occurred with our forefathers are perhaps an indication and guidance for the future generations as well. And the book ends in this state of uncertainty, out and away from the land of Israel. The journey of exile is going to be described in detail in part in the book of Shemot. So what we're going to go ahead and do is the following. The beginning of the portion, there is uniqueness here as well, by the way, that this is, as a Balkora, you know, that usually in the beginning of every single weekly portion there is a gap between the last paragraph in the previous parsha and the first paragraph of this parsha. There's no gap here. There's great symbolism there as well, that the gap represents the idea that you sit, you meditate, and you focus on what occurred beforehand. You learn the lesson, and then you move on. Right? Any successful teacher is going to give some time for things to be absorbed by the students. So there was something that was not absorbed from what was described at the end of last week's portion. At the end of last week's portion, we talk about a nation settling and multiplying in Egypt, in the region of Goshen. Now they were supposed to meditate or spend some time to assess their existence and say to themselves, yes, we are here, but this is not our homeland. Our home is the land of Israel. Well, that focus did not take place. They didn't have that gap, and that's what we have in the beginning of this week's portion. No gap there. Great message indeed. We have the story of Yaakov giving a blessing to his grandchildren, to Menashe and Ephraim, and upgrading their status, that they become like children. Very significant portion as well. We have Yaakov turning to his children and being harsh on page 276, being quite harsh on the zealots being Levi, Shimon, and Levi. Levi and Shimon, says our patriarch Yaakov, that I want to separate them and disperse them in Israel in verse 7 on page 276. And as commentators point out, zealots are very dangerous if they are together. Right? The fire grows based on their interactions with one another. If on the other hand you take the zealot and you put him in a community, he could be a great igniter. He could bring excitement to Judaism, and it could be balanced when he is not with others. The zealots have always been destructive to the people of Israel, 2,000 years ago and 20 minutes ago. That's the history of the people of Israel. But if you use them and manipulate them correctly, says our patriarch Yaakov, you could work something else. Yehuda has a very strong and robust blessing from his father that indicates leadership. And on page 278, we are told in verse 11, Osri lagefen ira, that in his terrain, in the region designated for Yehuda, you will be able to tie the donkey to a vine. And the vine, you could go ahead and tie them, indicating that there will be such an abundance of vines that the sensitivity, the traditional farmer or the wine grower would have. Vine grower, perhaps?
Vintner.
The vintner, the sensitivity will have, no.
Vintner.
Winter spelled pronounced badly.
The winemaker.
Farmer.
The winemaker sensitivity will not be there, because if there's an abundance, he would not have a problem of tying his donkey to the vine. And also indicates that they're going to be loading lots of grapes from vine to donkey. And there's also symbolism there to the Messiah. You know the tradition that he's going to be riding on a donkey. Today we would expect him to come on a white Cadillac, but no, he's going to be coming on a donkey. Horses were for war. The Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, is not a warrior. He's not going to come on a horse. He's going to come on a donkey. And this is symbolized in the text as well. And wine and messianic era go hand in hand. Because in our tradition, when the land of Israel produces in abundance, the Talmud shares with us that that's a sign that the Messiah is going to come. And if you want to go ahead and address and point to one product that symbolizes the physical world to the fullest, it is wine. So when the land of Israel produces wine that is of high quality, when it produces wine that the whole world claims that this is indeed from the greatest around, you could see that as a sign. I got a gift from my mother-in-law. You know, she works and she gets gifts. So at times I have the chus of getting a few of those gifts. So these were two aged wines. They're about 6 or 7 years old. One was from 2005. One was from 2007. I looked at the bottles. I didn't say anything, and I hope she's not going to watch it. They're not the high end, meaning these were bottles that probably the person purchased for $11 max, right? And they aged it for 7 years, right, to collect the dust in someone's garage, and then it was handed out, which is fine. I'm more than happy to take it. One was from Israel, and one was from France. Okay, the one from Israel, I think, was from the Efrat Winery, 2007. It was not an expensive bottle of wine. It was good. It was actually good. I opened the Fortan from France, 2005. I mentioned to the family, if anyone needs vinegar, we have 750 milliliters of it. And I had a good feeling afterwards that the one from Israel was good, and the one from France was awful. I felt good. And this is because that we are believers that when from the land of Israel, the produce is good. When you can walk through Machne Yehuda and you see magnificent looking fruits and vegetables and wine more than anything else, it is a sign that the one riding on the Iran, the donkey, is on his way. Very significant, one after the other. You could analyze each one of the blessings in detail, how there's a reference to Samson, to Shimshon, in verse 16 and 17. There is indeed a lot there, but I would like to go to the Levaya. So you're going to turn to page 284, and we're going to talk about the passing of Yaakov.
284.
And on page 284, this is the last chapter in the book of Bereshit, where after a request in verse 6, Vayomer Paro gives a green light. He needed permission to leave the country. Ale ukvar et avicha Yosef, go up. I understand you are a minister, you're busy, but go. Make your way to the land of Israel to bury your father as you took an oath to do. Ka'asher hishbi'echa. That's what there are rabbinic statements. Why? Only because of the oath. Verse 7, Vaya'al Yosef likvar et aviv. There's a procession from Egypt to the land of Israel towards Hebron. Vaya'alu ito kol avdei paro. All the servants of Pharaoh join a large levaya. Ziknei beito, the elders of his household. Chol ziknei eretz Mitzrayim, the elders of the land of Egypt. And then afterwards, which is interesting, that the family members, his brothers, the mishpacha, are only mentioned in verse 8. V'chol bet Yosef ve'echav u'bet aviv. The family is mentioned here. Who did they leave back? They only left the children, the flock, the cattle. They left that in Egypt. Verse 9. Vaya'al imo gam rechev gam parashim. So this is an Egyptian possession that's going to have chariots, horsemen, right? A very, very large camp. Hamachane kaved me'od. A very large camp. Now, verse 10, on the way, there's a hesped. You know, there's a tradition at a levaya that you stop 7 times. You know where it originated from? When they would bury outside of town, it took time for the Chavar Kadisha to make their way. People would not go. The Chavar Kadisha would travel to the Beis Olam. If you're carrying on your shoulders a coffin, you have to take breaks. So you would put it down. Now they're going to put down the coffin. They're going to rest for a few minutes. They're not going to be talking about the ball game. Right? They're not going to be talking about the news. They're going to go ahead and talk about the deceased. Mention a few good deeds of his. So they would stop. Once they were stopping, symbolically, number 7 represents the cycle of life. So they did it 7 times, and every single time they would stop and they would say, Hesped. So that has how this tradition, of course, the Kabbalists enhanced the significance of the ceremony, and therefore we have this tradition that we stop 7 times. I personally believe that if you go, we have 7 traffic lights between here and the Beis Olam. You can also fulfill the minute with it, right? But technically, as you know, there is this tradition of stopping 7 times. So they stopped at some point. This is a langa levaya from Egypt all the way to Hebron. So they stopped somewhere, and the Torah decides to describe in detail where the hesped, where this eulogy took place. And now let's analyze verse 10. Vayavo, and they all arrive to Goren Ha'atad. They arrive at a place called Goren Ha'atad. Where is Goren Ha'atad? Asher Be'ever HaYarden, which is on the other side, which is across the Jordan. Now, everything's across the Jordan, right? Jordan is across the Jordan. Across of what side of the Jordan? So some commentators are disturbed because they say, wait a second, across the Jordan meaning in Jordan. But the problem is if they're traveling from Egypt to Hebron, why do they need to go across the Jordan? And they have all kinds of questions. I think, or it has been mentioned, that this is a book given to the people of Israel, and they were in the wilderness. Sections of it were taught be'arvot Moab. In other words, the final version of the book was given by Moshe Rabbeinu to the people of Israel when they are in Jordan. So when he describes to them the place of Goren Atad, he says, as he is standing on the east bank of the Jordan River, he says to them, you want to know where Goren Atad is? It's on the other side of the Jordan River in the land of Israel. Very, very possible. Right? We could debate and argue, but that's an approach we could take. But Goren Ha'atad is where the Hesped takes place. Vayispedu Sham in verse 10. They go ahead and they have a very great eulogy. Misped gadol vekaved meod. This was a very powerful, very moving eulogy. Vayas la'aviv evel shivat yavim. And they stay there, they mourn for 7 days. Now, Shivat Yamim. Verse 11. Vayar Yoshev ha'aretz ha'kna'ani. The Kna'anim who were there in the land of Israel, when they saw the great eulogy, et ha'evel, and the mourning that took place at Goren Ha'atad, Vayomru, they declared, Evel kaved ze leMitzrayim. This is a great day, this is a great mourning for the Egyptians. It seems to be that the crowd of Egyptians outnumbered the members of the household of Yosef. And therefore, Al Ken Karash Shema, and therefore the name of the place remains, Avel Mitzrayim, the mourning of the Egyptians. Asher Be'ever HaYarden. Now, the children, in verse 12, do what their father commanded by, in verse 13, Vaisu oto banav arza. They carry him into the land of Canaan. They bury him in Ma'arat HaMachpelah. And we're given again a brief history of Ma'arat HaMachpelah. So this is the Levaya. Eventually he's buried in Hebron, Yishenei Hebron we talk about. And that's what we have. Comes Rashi, shares with us 2 oral traditions which are quite significant to understand. So look at verse 10 in Rashi. Goren ha'atad. Now we obviously there's a message here. The Torah would not describe the name of a location that happened to have a eulogy. And then the Torah shares with us that it was renamed because of that eulogy. There must be more of a meaning, more significance. So there is a midrash that Rashi shares with us. Goren ha'atad. So explanation number 1, mukaf atadin haya. That on the basic level, Goren ha'atad was a threshing floor. Threshing floors, like on the Temple Mount, it was a threshing floor. Threshing floors are often on areas where there's wind. The benefit is, and it would be a disc-like terrain. The local farmers would bring their grain there. They would get their cows. The farmer would put on these shoes that had spikes under it, would get his cow, push the button that gets the cow moving, and he would start the process of threshing. You have a lot of chaff. If you have it at an area that is windy, the chaff would be blown away. That's what I always daven every single fall, that a good wind comes and takes away all my leaves. Right? That's what I daven. Wouldn't it be nice that there's so much wind in Toronto, why can't the wind just come right to my lawn and move it on? But it doesn't work like that. But on a Goren,
Blowish to your neighbors, yeah.
I don't know. To someone of the courts, juries. So, Goren Atad, Goren is a threshing floor, disc-shaped. You can move the animals round and around, and chaff is blown away. Now, what happens if it's too windy? The grain goes too.
Yeah.
So how do you work around that? So what they would do is they would take thorns and put them around. They would make these hedges of thorns, place them around the perimeter of the threshing floor. So then, if it would be a little bit too windy, at least the grain would be protected by the thorns. So it was a goren that had an atad. The word atad, aleph, tet, daled means thorns. It makes its appearance in Tehillim and other places in Tanakh. So this was a threshing floor that had thorns. Very significant that the Torah has to tell us. It's good. It's nice information. There must be more to it. But this is what Rashi presents as pshat, the basic understanding. Then Rashi adds, V'rabotenu darshu, the rabbis had a tradition that it relates to the me'orah, that it relates to the occasion. And I'll tell you what Rashi shares with us, that all the kings of Canaan came, and when they saw that large group, they wanted to attack. But when they saw the crown of Yosef hanging on top of the aron, of the casket of Yaakov, they all placed their crowns, and the thorns, according to the Midrash, are not actual thorns, but they are crowns, meaning that the world came to accept the authority of Yosef when they saw the honor there. The crown of Yosef was present, and therefore they placed their crowns, and crowns have the spiked tops for whatever reason, and as a result, there were lots of thorns surrounding the area. A beautiful midrash must have a message. Another Rashi that is important, Rashi tells us that when, in the next verse, that when the father was carried, he designated which children should carry and what sides they should be standing on. And he placed Dan to the south, and he placed each one of his children at a very specific location to carry as a pallbearer. And eventually, when they left Egypt, and they had a unique formation around the Holy Ark and the Mishkan and the Tabernacle, it followed the exact same formation designated and established by Yaakov. Another interesting midrash, but let's try to put it all together. The symbolism of the exile. This is a portion of exile. However, in this week's portion, we actually have a Yetziat Mitzrayim. There is an exodus in this week's portion. They left Egypt. Now, they didn't leave forever. They came back. But they did leave Egypt. And if this is a book of symbolism, if this is a book that is establishing patterns, there must be something established by the fact that a very, very large group leaves Egypt. Right? What is it symbolizing in Exodus from Egypt? So there are going to be two levels. In other words, it will symbolize two departures from exile. One of them is the Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt we are familiar with, and therefore there's going to be symbolism that relates to it. What symbolism will relate to the Exodus? Number one, Yaakov was asked to be carried, surrounded by children with a specific formation. That was the formation that was used for them later on, 200 years later, to leave Egypt. Excellent. Now, what is the symbolism of the goren, of the threshing floor, and the thorn? So we talk often about the brilliance that exists in nature. Like the brilliance in nature. Kiwis, I talk about bananas often, but let's talk about kiwis, right? Mushy fruit, somehow the peel is able to protect it. Right? And you go through the fruit department, and you realize that whoever came up with the production line of all the fruits and vegetables was brilliant. Right? The packaging of the banana is still the king. The idea that you take a mushy banana that the child holds and it's everywhere, and the Rabbanu Shalom can produce this peel that is just so perfect. And then you open the tangerine, and the tangerine itself, how it could be peeled due to the dryness that's on the inside of the peel, correct? And then every section is just the right bite size. Right? Awesome thinking of the Rabbanu Shalom. Now, obviously, God is communicating with us that this is for us to enjoy, to appreciate. He does exist. If this would just be a random existence, everything could have been black and white, and it could have been just one type of food we would have been surviving on. So obviously, if there are so many, due to the fact that God created such variety, so we can say, Baruch Elohim, blessed is God for giving us this magnificent variety. We could have lived, we could have existed. If you are a believer that it's random due to the fact that 13.7 billion years ago there was a Big Bang, we could have survived, we could have been there without the variety. The variety indicates a higher being. Magnificent. But then, the foundation of all meals are going to be the bread, but there are no bread trees. And yes, you found me once, last time I said it, you found me a website that there are breads that grow, but I could still, my drasha still remains. That the reality is that the breads that we use are very, very complex. We go through 11 stages before we put the bulka on the table. Right? Why did God make it that way? He could have, obviously, maybe that's the message, that there are bread trees, so he could have made all bread as bread trees. But he did not, because he wants us to learn something from that as well. And that is to teach us that just as the important food for the body, you have to go through a process before you live off it, so too, the food for the soul, you have to go through a process before you will go ahead and have it. We cannot believe that spirituality is easy, that it's just humming and meditating and mission accomplished. There is a system to be a spiritual person. There is a system to be an ethical person. And that's what Torah is about. Torah is always compared to the process of making bread. Lechu lachmu belachmi. There are verses that indicate that. Torah is like bread. You want to go ahead, you first have to create an environment that's conducive for Torah. Then you put seeds of Torah, which is educating the children. And then when it grows, there's shaft. There are elements that you have to, of intellectual elements that have to be rejected. And then you have to process it, and you have to add water. And you even have to have patience. You're right? Hevu metunim badin in Pirkei Avot we're taught that judges and rabbinic leaders have to have patience. They have to let things settle. If you want a good bread, you can't bake it immediately. You have to let it rise. You have to bake it at the right temperature at the right time. Bread is to teach you how to be and how to deal with the system that guides us, which is Torah. And therefore, the threshing floor symbolizes spiritual growth, a location of spirituality. And eventually the temple in Jerusalem, Bet HaMikdash, where Kimitzion Tetzeh Torah, that is the source of Torah for eternity. It is where the courts, the Bet Din HaGadol, the great court, was present there. It guided humanity, but what was on that Temple Mount beforehand? When King David, when David HaMelech purchased that land, he purchased it from a fellow called Aravna, and it was a threshing floor. That's what it was. For us, we turn to the threshing floor for guidance. No question about it. And if this chapter, if this event of people, they're leaving Egypt, it symbolizes the future Exodus, the formation and the way the children stood around Yaakov, or the way the children of Israel are going to stand around the Mishkan. If it symbolizes the Exodus, so there's obviously a symbol here for Kabbalat HaTorah, to the events that occurred at Sinai. And Kabbalat HaTorah was an event of a threshing floor where we received the Torah. And therefore the Torah spells out the fact that yes, they eulogize at the location of where that was a threshing floor. But, we have this challenge that we're supposed to preserve our faith, but at the same time believe that the day will come that we're going to reach out to humanity. So how do you deal with the world on the outside? This is a great challenge of Judaism. Right? You're supposed to go ahead and tell your children of the value of being Jewish, but then I remember a little child in Israel singing "Goy Goy Yemach Shemo." I don't know if I should even translate it, but a little child singing about how awful the Goyim are. Now that is a natural result of a culture that tries to preserve itself. Unfortunately, here it's going to an extreme that we are preserving ourselves by making others subhuman. That's not the way to do it. On the other hand, if we go ahead and educate our children by saying that that we're all the same, that all humans are the same, what's going to stop them from one day rejecting all of tradition, claiming that, listen, all humans are valuable, so if so, why should I preserve what is uniquely part of my heritage? It's not easy to balance it, right? You have to find the right way to balance it. As long as we are in exile, unfortunately, there's going to be a barrier between us and the world around us. Until we reach our destination. And when the Torah was given, you know how we call the Torah's, the mountain where it was Har Sinai, and the rabbis play with the word Sinai, which is similar to the word Sina, hatred. There's hatred. The reality is that when we go ahead and we declare that we have the Torah, that we are special, And as was noted already by earlier authorities, en pirud halavavot ke pirud hadatot. What separates humans more than anything else are faiths. If I have a different faith, the reality is I am not going to be a very, very close friend with someone that doesn't share my faith. There are going to be boundaries due to the fact that the threshing floor exists. And therefore, symbolically, that which surrounds the threshing floor, the thorns, which is a fence, is the fence that was produced at Sinai. So the first reading of this event, them leaving Egypt, and it symbolizing the Yetziat Mitzrayim, has reference to the Exodus, as mentioned, with the formation of how they carried their father, and their father symbolized their link to the past and their link to God. And in the wilderness, the Holy Ark was their link to their heritage, and therefore they had the exact same formation. And in addition, Mount Sinai is symbolized here by the Goren Atad, the threshing floor that has thorns around it. That's what it symbolizes. So that's a very basic explanation. However, this Exodus also symbolizes the future Exodus. The Exodus, the return to the land of Israel in the Messianic era. As the Ramban points out, the exile in Egypt, and the one described in this week's portion, symbolizes the long golus we are in, because this long golus we call Galut Romi. Who destroyed the temple? Right? Why were we sent out to the diaspora? Because of the Romans. Who, notes the Ramban, who is really to blame for bringing the Romans into the land of Israel? In other words, who welcomed that superpower into the region? It happened to be the Hashmonaim. It happened to be that Yehuda, as a political move to limit the power of the Greeks in the future, he welcomed and he began the process of allowing the Romans in. This is based on Josephus, and the Ramban points it out. So it comes out that this bitter golus that we talk about, you want to know who's to blame? We are to blame. And you know what brought it all about? Well, Jews selling one another. In other words, the rabbis always note that the Churban Bayit Sheni, that the destruction of the Second Temple, was the byproduct of the fact that we couldn't get along, that we were killing one another, literally, fighting with one another. We're not tolerant to anything that wasn't exactly the way we viewed as correct. We are the ones that brought about our existence. Now, it empowers us to realize that we can make the changes from within, and then the results will be good. But the reality is, we have to be mindful of the fact it is the Jews who brought us. It is us who brought us to where we are. And why are they in Egypt? Why did they land up in Egypt? Well, because they sold their brother to Egypt. So the Ramban points out that our Lange Golus is symbolized in the Golus in this week's portion. And therefore the portion ends and leaves us hanging where they are in Egypt, which indicates this long extended period because it symbolizes our period. Now, if it symbolizes the Messianic era, when will things shift? In other words, when will we have our Exodus? So it's interesting. We always talk about the Moshiach ben David. There's also a tradition of Mashiach ben Yosef. And there are many different insights to what it refers to. But it also refers to the idea that Yosef was concerned for the welfare of humanity. Welfare of humanity. Nevertheless, he was able to retain his Jewish identity to the fullest. Right? That is Yosef HaTzadik. He had that ability. Concern for humanity while retaining. Joe Lieberman got a lot of credit for being compared, and in many ways he deserves that credit. That here is a man, that he's in Washington. He was 536 votes away from being the vice president of the United States of America, if not for some old Jewish women in Florida who voted for Buchanan by mistake. But he was very, very close to it. Very, very close to it. And he was always there, Mekadesh Hashem. He sanctified the name of God, and he was considered honest and respected by all. And here he was able to go ahead and put out a book about the importance of keeping Shabbos. Meaning he's in Washington and he uses Al Gore as his Shabbos guy. What does that teach the world? It teaches the world that yes, you could be concerned, and he was concerned. And he did for the welfare of the United States. Not the welfare state, but the welfare of the people of the world and the United States. A man of value and a man that is determined to do good for the world. But he retains his faith, and that's what the Messianic era is. It is not just a time for us, it is a time for humanity. Yosef symbolizes that concern for humanity. And when Yosef, and when there are Yosefs that are pure tzaddikim, that are 100% righteous, but they nevertheless interact with the world, inspire the world, are concerned for the world, that's when thorns could turn into crowns. That's when that which surrounds us are no longer the thorns and the boundaries that hurt us, the ghetto walls, the boundaries that hurt the world because they cannot really join us to the fullest. They cannot become part of us because we have to separate ourselves. Those thorns around us in the Messianic, in the Yemos HaMashiach, are going to turn into crowns when the nations of the world are going to say, you know what? The Jews have some very unique message. The Jews have a right to exist and exist in their homeland. These are things that we do believe in, that we do believe that they're going to happen. But that's when we have people like Yosef that retain every element and every aspect of their tradition while they have concern and they are able to interact without budging one iota. So that, of course, will explain the midrashic approach to these words. Goren ha'atad, the threshing floor with thorns. The thorns are not those thorns that if you sit on, you'll go ouch, but they are the thorns that are crowns. And why did the world, why did humanity place those crowns around Yaakov and around Jewish tradition? Why did they show that respect? When they saw, as Rashi points out in the name of the Midrash, when they saw the crown of Yosef, Kevan Shira'u, second line of Rashi, Kitroshel Yosef, when they saw the crown of Yosef, Talui Ba'arano, hanging from the bier of Yaakov, Amdu Kulan, all nations did the same. And therefore the Kotzim, and that's the idea of the Messianic era, when thorns turn into crowns. That is the message and that's the symbolism. And therefore we have to read this portion on two levels. The level of that it symbolizes the Exodus, and the level that it symbolizes the Messianic era. A very loaded parsha with lots of information, and something that should be viewed even though it's a short portion. But nevertheless, we were able to focus and perhaps present a little bit of an understanding of the Goren Ha'atad. I apologize again that we have to keep it a bit short today, but Bezrat Hashem, we see you all next week. Thank you for coming.
Good.
Yes. Okay, Reb Hanani ben Akash Emer Tzadok Baruch Hu L'Zaku Esis Yisrael. Lefika, here we're going to a mitzvah שנאמר, "Matzit k'yagdir teir v'yagdir
Iskadar v'yiskadash shmei rabo v'yom ha'dibar v'yirisei v'yamek ma'asei v'chayechon v'nachon v'chayech v'beis Yisrael Magala v'zman kariv v'yei shmei rabo v'yom Shabbat Yisrael v'yisnasei v'yisador v'yisaleh v'yisaleh shmei d'kusha v'yigo